Hello, everybody. Back to this series where I talk about people, the good, the bad, and the history, all while making average, non-glamorous suppers for my family of four. And tonight we're going to have the delightful tuna casserole, another cause for Great Depression in my son. It's very simple. We're going to turn the oven on to 350, and then we're going to bake up the pasta and make a little sauce and cover it with cheese. So follow along. The baddie of the week is Andrew, not a doctor anymore, Wakefield. It might be that you've never heard his name before, and it might be that you know everything I'm about to say. But there's one thing about this man that everyone can agree on. He's really left his mark on the last 30 years, whether you actually know it or not. See, he was born in 1956 to a scholarly set of parents. His father was a neurologist and his mother a GP. Now, I'm not saying this is a lot to live up to, but that's a heck of a lot to live up to. And he may have been born in Eton, UK, but he didn't attend Eton, UK. He attended King Edward's School in Bath as a little boy and then went on to study medicine at St. Mary's in London, which was on the verge of becoming the most popular medical school in the country. It was a grand, young school, having been founded in only about 1854. Sort of a rough sportsman's school with an active polo club, and it was the favorite of the Queen Mum as well. Andrew even joined the Royal College of Surgeons in 1985. Then it appears he crossed the pond to the U of T, Toronto, that is, part of a study that would look into the tissue rejections in small intestine transplants. Young Andrew set out on an adventure, traveling through with the Fellowship Wellcome Trust, which is an enormously wealthy charitable foundation, whose goal it is to support science and solve health issues that are plaguing the world today, however vague that is. It's rumored that the money doesn't exactly always go to the projects. Andrew might have caught on to something at the time, or maybe something told him that there was money to be made in medicine and not just in wages. Because he was really, really into guts. Like, he loved all things stomach. So much that when he was back in London, he worked on a program about liver transplants. In the early 90s, he would write a paper for a magazine called The Lancet, a reputable medical publication, which suggested that the link between measles and Crohn's disease might be a thing. Now, first he was saying that measles caused Crohn's disease, but he changed his tune about 2 years later, probably because measles was commonly vaccinated against birth, and Crohn's was still a problem. His paper would actually claim that the measles vaccine caused Crohn's. I'm not saying he was reaching, but in 1995, when a desperate mother came to him for help with her autistic son, who had bowel problems, Andrew Wakefield leapt out into the world of make-believe. The mother, Rosemary Kissick, had a group called Allergy-Induced Autism. Now, the mother wasn't alone coming to Wakefield, but we'll get back to that later. And after speaking to her about her son, Wakefield was inspired, and he decided that the MMR, which was measles, mumps, and rubella, was this pesky, pesky link to Crohn's. He actually realized that maybe it was responsible for something worse than Crohn's. So Wakefield started another study. Not for the paper he had already published in the Lancet about Crohn's, which the Royal Free Hospital was really asking him for. See, this was the school he was lecturing at the time, and they were rather angry. He was making them look like fools. These were pretty high claims. Andrew was busy. He was conducting research linking the symptoms of autism to the act of vaccinating a person with the MMR all at once, something he would call a climatic event in any baby's life. He actually had 8 to 12 families participate, and all the children had autism, and they were all, well, for the most part, said they noticed autism directly following vaccination. Every parent, he said, and maybe he even stretched for a bit looking for all of them, had noticed their bright and happy babies change sometimes within hours of getting the jabs. And he claimed he knew of 30 to 40 more families. It was all coming from this new symptom he had found, something he was coining autistic enterocolitis. And then in early 1998, Andrew published his conclusions, again in the Lancet, that quiet little medical essay, Nothing really definitive was mentioned. In fact, the magazine even said there was no connection here. This is just what Wakefield, was saying. And those in the autism field were probably thinking, what? Who is this gastro guy? Why is he saying these crazy things? But Wakefield didn't just rely on that paper alone. He pulled a press conference.
In his press conference, Andrew Wakefield stood up and said, parents should not give their children the MMR vaccine, period, until we are able to get to the bottom of this.
The MMR vaccination in combination, that I think that it should be suspended in favor of the single vaccines.
The notion that you would take a 12-person case study and make claims about a population as a whole is ridiculous. This paper was historically bad.
His words went out to hundreds of thousands of British parents who were suddenly faced with the idea of not risking vaccinating their children. He sat there, morally stating that he could not support the use of the MMR 3-in-1 jab vaccine and recommended doing them separately over about 3 years. Now, the mainstream media around the UK served it up on a platter to their audience at large, and the fear preyed on everyone for many years. Now, I just want you to consider that this was his one paper. This little report that he sent to the Lancet with 12 families, but really there was only like 8 parents that really qualified. This was really the only evidence, and remains the only evidence, and evidence is in air quotes right now, that has ever been proposed a link between autism and vaccines, okay? That's it, okay? I'm serious. You can go look and you can talk to anybody who's claiming that they're anti-vax, and most of the time, if not like 100% of the time, their research goes back to this one British paper. And again, there's nothing in vaccines that actually cause brain development disorders like autism. They're just not connected. There have been so many studies where directly regarding this connection or indirectly, they prove no connection at all.
Throughout the UK. We did the study. It took a lot longer than we first anticipated because it was a new approach and we had to go quite carefully and slowly. But by 2004, we completed the study, the largest ever study of the question of measles vaccine and autism, and along with other studies internationally, pretty conclusively showed there was no association between measles vaccine and autism, and this helped restore faith in the vaccine.
As common sense will probably tell you, heck, there are even studies about people who are so into this study that they won't take all legit studies to heart. But Andrew was popular. Perhaps it was because he was so convicted about it, ready to speak with every reporter, producing tapes of his own that explains his side. He was exciting to some, a fraud and a wanker to others, and he was some parents' saviors. But the thing was, he was attracting money and attention, and that was a good thing for a while. So the media had a bit of an interest at the time. They liked to keep stories going. I mean, this was the late 90s, and the 24-hour newsreel wasn't that old yet. It was still quite new, and they were looking for something. And nothing really sells like fear. So as I get saucy here, I'm gonna do a little aside. This is actually not in the Wikipedia report, or it's not very clear, but Andrew Wakefield and his little study of 12 families was not as pure as even I described. Andrew had an interest in severely attacking the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine at the time, because there was at least one other person with him in this study that was producing their own vaccines. I'm going to repeat that. He was against MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, because he was developing his own. Yes. In fact, he had a medical patent out for this. The other doctor who was on this medical patent for this alternate vaccine is called Dr. Fundenberg, and he is not a cool person. He believes he can cure autism, specifically with his own bone marrow. There was one journalist at the time who really wanted to scratch under Andrew's cool veneer, and his name was Deer, Brian Deer. Along with a patent for the vaccine for measles, invented by himself, Andrew had 2 medical businesses, and besides the vaccine of his own, he also began to build test kits to find the presence of autism in the bowels. Oh my God, this is so stupid even to me, and I don't know anything about how this would work. He would dream of attracting investors for the funding. He would even hobnob a bit with Johnson & Johnson, and was being flown around by potential pharmaceutical suitors. But it all hinged on if Andrew could prove that autistic enterocolitis, measles in the bowels, existed. When a third company opened in Ireland began to produce these much needed results, testing over 200 autistic children and detecting the presence of measles in all of them, it was perfect. Well, for him. But then other labs started to look closer and found that even in this study, Andrew had inflated something. And it was not all connected to measles. In fact, I don't know what I'm saying, but it was all a negative, essentially. To be honest, they were really stretching the allowable mistake line and beginning to cross into, you did this on purpose territory. There was some dwindling interest, professional interest in his claims. And the Royal Free Hospital, which was where he was lecturing and where he was working, was starting to get really upset about this. I mean, half of them were supporting him, but the other half were saying, okay, where's your scientific fact? Andrew did not take the opportunity to prove himself. Instead, he came up with a mutual agreement to leave the hospital. And then he would make his way to the United States. Now, later, he would complain that they were making him look bad because they were supposedly on the side of Big Pharma and this scary MMR. And this is where the rhetoric is starting to get a little bit familiar. This one paper involving 12 families sparked measles outbreaks across the UK, some of which resulted in deaths or serious lifelong illness. There are several documentaries and think pieces dominating the headlines following this. They preyed on millions of parents' fears. And there was even a lawyer tangled into the mix who was invested in the downfall of MMR through class action lawsuits of those 12 families. In fact, this doctor may have been one of the first to approach with that first mother, may have been one of the first to approach Andrew and suggest, can we make a link here between something and the vaccine? Because there is millions to be made in court. Now, as the 2000s progressed in the UK and more people were getting sick from not vaccinating, people who worked with Wakefield on the original paper started to come forward, denouncing his practices during the study, such as being paid by the lawyer to conduct the study only to discredit MMR, which most of the time none of the other involvees knew. That's a word. Or that 4 out of 12 of the parents would say that they noticed symptoms of autism way before vaccinating. And that some didn't even have children with autism. I think about 3 or 4 of them. One of the children of the families wasn't even from the UK. He was from California. Very, very popular one, in fact. Someone you probably know about. The study itself was filled with lies, false statements from the parents. Everyone tilted to make it seem like the onset of autism symptoms took place within days of the MMR vaccine, sometimes within hours. This was to help it seem like it was less of a coincidence that, children developed these autistic symptoms around the time that they normally would. So Brian Deer, the journalist who had been bear-poking Andrew, was bear-poked himself when Andrew tried to sue Brian, and he failed dismally. Now, his own records fell into Deer's hands, and Brian went ahead and published everything he discovered in a series of articles in 2003. He told of what these 12 children had been through, and this is pretty awful. They were studied for the original paper at the time for a week. They had to be anesthetized a lot of times, put through procedures like colonoscopies, spinal taps, and tens of other Very irritating things. Several children had been terribly hurt with colonoscopies perforating their bowels. Parents had never once been told of the risks. They were subjected, children as young as 3, to, most of these kids were autistic. Nurses were quitting. Strange drugs were being tried out on the children. For example, the bone marrow of that old Mr. Dr. Funenberg, who was like, wow, how could, what? Okay, so listen, the GMC, like the big daddies of medicine, came for Andrew, finally, in 2004. Finally, in 2010, the council hearings were over and the GMC struck Wakefield from the medical profession, making him a doctor no more. The phrase callous disregard was suddenly synonymous with Andrew Wakefield in the UK, and he was villainized. Except for a couple of the parents of severely autistic children who were still supporting him, he was despised. Wakefield kept these people close. He acted like their martyr. He even used the words callous disregard as the title for his first book, which became a new selling product he would peddle. In truth, Wakefield was now exposed as an elaborate...
According to this new report, not only did you do a study that was scientifically and ethically flawed, it was, quote, an elaborate fraud. An award-winning investigative journalist, Brian Deere, has published evidence that you, and I quote, altered numerous facts about patients' medical histories to support your claims of identifying a new syndrome, and that you also, quote, sought to exploit the scare among parents for financial gain. How do you respond?
Well, you know, I've had to put up with this man's false allegations for many, many years. I've written a book, and in
but
that
this is
book,
not just
I've
one man. This is published in the British Medical Journal.
Yeah, no, and I have not as yet had a chance to read that, but I have read his multiple allegations on many occasions. He is a hitman. He's been brought in to take me down because they are very, very concerned about the adverse reactions to vaccines that are occurring in children.
Wait a minute, sir. Let me just stop you right there. You say he's a hitman and he's been brought in by they. Who is they? Who is he a hitman for? This is an independent journalist who's won many awards.
Yeah, and he's, you know, who brought this man in? Who is paying this man? I don't know.
When he moved to the United States in early 2001 or even 4-ish, he was able to whip up a new audience. However, one thing was markedly different. They were anti-vax, not anti-MMR, which, you know, was what he was about. They were fully anti-vax people. People from Bill Maher to Robert De Niro, and then, of course, Jenny McCarthy.
Without a doubt in my mind, I believe vaccinations triggered Evan's autism.
You know, environmental toxins play a role, viruses play a role. Those are all triggers, but vaccines play the largest role right now. And something needs to be done.
We are in a very intelligent group of people that understand that vaccines save lives. But we're also saying that vaccines are sometimes harmful to some kids.
Now, Jenny was so influential that her story with the vaccine panic flooded across North America and elsewhere in the world, to be honest. Wakefield regularly appeared throughout the States and in documentaries in the years following, and it was almost as if losing his medical license recommended him more to the Americans. And backing homeopaths and naturalists became, no doubt, his only path forward. He tried again to sue Brian Deere, this time from Austin, where he ended up losing and having to pay for all of the legal fees himself and Brian's. The states still seem to love him, taking on his paper as proof for the anti-vax or vax criticism movements. In fact, it's his one paper that most of them are fully relying on, even if they don't know it. In 2016, he made a film called Vaxxed, in which he accused the CDC of a huge cover-up and urges the audience to follow the money. It was his way of making money. He always had to have some way. Now, he did get paid by the lawyer for that original study, about $1 million, but his soul and the peace of the modern world paid for it. In the 90s, British immunization rates dropped as low as 50% in London and saw measles outbreaks across the country. Whooping cough returned and threatened the smallest of lives. But then, as soon as the Wakefield's paper was redacted by the Lancet, which it was officially, the numbers of vaccinated people went right back up. In fact, this whole incident is probably why the UK has such high vaccination rates for COVID. There's still a collective experience with that bad side of things. Now, in the US, the measles returned, resulting in hundreds of deaths. Once there was even an outbreak in Disneyland. It's important to point out, back to the media for hosting Wakefield on so many platforms, for spreading fear of the vaccines, and for still calling him a doctor in their captions. But as Mark Twain would say, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on shoes. Where is this Wakefield now? Well, he's just the world-weary ex-doctor still trying to prove himself and his theory and take down those who oppose him. But really, he's just occasionally does like these cruises where he peddles his pseudoscience to elderly people. He appears on truth summits or even on InfoWars to talk about how the COVID is like a flu. He's usually the pot of gold at the end of the Google rainbow if you go looking for why people are anti-vax. And once more, he's only ever showed in this one study with 8 families that prove him. That, my cooking friends, is the baddest person of the week. If you are outraged about what I'm talking about today and you want to know more, I strongly suggest watching a very lengthy video on Wakefield by H Bomber Guy here on YouTube, or the work of Brian Greene himself. He's got a great website and a YouTube channel, and he is constantly working on exposing the truth. Wakefield knows exactly what he's doing, and it's bad. Doctors don't need publicists, do they? You bloody grifter. Anyway, see you next time, guys. Bye!